Hi there, and welcome to Returnology, where we bring in experts to dig into the latest trends in retail, supply chain, and everyone's favorite topic, returns. Essentially, we provide you the cheat sheet to help you ace returns. I'm your host, I'm Natalie Walkley, and I'm the VP of Marketing here. And in today's episode, I'm joined by two of my favorite colleagues and really two of my favorite people, Chris Wykoff and Ricardo Menendez. Chris is the VP of Product here at Optoro, focused on returns processing. So everything that happens from testing, grading, dispositioning, relisting, and reselling returned merchandise for a high recovery. Ricardo spent over a decade working with us at Optoro from our early days and has recently transitioned into a new role as the SVP of Operations and Supply Chain at Stork. Stork is a recommerce vendor and a partner of Optoro's that helps give a second life to baby gear and home goods. I'm so excited to have them on today's show as we dig into the great debate. So should you use your WMS or an RMS for returns? I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's dig right in. So Ricardo, question for you as we kick off here. You said that you've been in supply chain 20 years. That's amazing. I'm slowly catching up to you, I guess. You've worked with our team for over a decade. So you know reverse logistics, you know returns in and out. Walk me through what are some of the challenges of returns and specifically reverse logistics that you've seen in your career?
Yeah. Thank you again, Natalie, for the invite. And, some of the biggest challenges is as space and labor are becoming more and more costly, you need to be able to not only track the units and the condition of the units coming back, but allow the operators to be efficient. So I've seen with Optoro and through other companies how, swivel chair approaches of using 2 or 3 or 4 systems at the same time, you know, are easy to make mistakes. Obviously, it takes more time to switch from one system to another, which creates inefficiencies. And then, having one system of record is obviously preferable in any case, so you can track productivity by associate. So I think those are the biggest challenges. Companies used to avoid returns because it was the minority of their revenue or their cost. But as we continue to evolve in this e-commerce where everything is shipped to your house and you have the ability to return, I mean, you guys know with Optoro, we've seen return rates of, close to 50% in some categories, and with some consumers. And, when 50% of your product is coming back, you need to be able to not only track who's returning it, but also track the condition of the unit, make sure it matches your catalog, and make sure you disposition that item to what, like Chris said in the beginning, the best next home. And that could be either resell it online, send it to an outlet, or use recommerce partners like Stork, where we can take those goods and get a higher recovery than if you just liquidate by the pallet, or even better, if you throw into the landfill.
Yeah. Last week I was at IWLA conference talking with a lot of 3PLs, and another thing that came up, and, Ricardo, you're spot on with all of that. Another thing that came up is, retailers and 3PLs would avoid returns, but now that it's kind of been brought to light, they want to understand, okay, what's going on with returns? And without technology there, you're looking at spreadsheets, you're looking at, multiple systems, like you mentioned, and you lose the story of a return. And so one 3PL I was talking with was like, hey, I just signed a customer. They want to understand all of the visibility into all of their returns. When's it coming in? When are we receiving it? What's the condition? What's happening with it? And that unit level visibility is really challenging to get with a WMS. Like, we know WMSs were built for outbound fulfillment primarily, right? So Chris, that leads me to a question for you. And I know you mentioned Manhattan. You've been in supply chain tech space for a while. Walk me through, what are some of the shortcomings of a WMS when it comes to reverse logistics and specifically returns?
Yeah, for sure. So you guys just hit on a couple of the top ones. I think the being disjointed in the returns lifecycle is one major aspect. So when you have an RMS in place, you control everything from returns initiation all the way down through how it's coming back into your warehouse, into your return center, and then being touched and handled and conditioned, and all of that unit visibility that Ricardo touched on, all the way through connecting it to its next best home, partners, recommerce, recycle, back to stock for a majority of clothing brands. And so I think that holistic piece is a big thing where the WMS can play a piece in that, but it doesn't have the visibility across all aspects. The other big thing related to recommerce is being able to track everything down to the SKU, condition, quantity level is a big aspect where returns processing in the warehouse really shines, where you don't just have your SKU quantity metadata and 10 of this SKU are the exact same as 10 of this SKU. Each one is unique. They have different conditions, different issues maybe with them, different blemishes, different ways that they were given value to grow. And so having that visibility is a big piece of the RMS picture. In addition to that, it's just the purpose-built returns functionality. So WMS is, like you mentioned, Natalie, built for forward fulfillment, getting things to stores or from manufacturers and to customers via e-commerce. Returns are completely different. They come back into the warehouse super chaotic. You're not getting case packs of 10 of the same SKU. You're getting returns from all different people. They're in different packages, poly bags, your old shoe box, a UPS box, all different shapes and sizes come back. And having a system that has tools purpose built to accept those returns, grade those returns, get them back to a vendor, get them back to a recommerce partner, get them back graded quality back to stock is a huge piece where, those different functionalities are not necessarily there in the WMS.
Yeah, absolutely. I giggled when you were talking because most retailers and operators hate returns. And last week I met someone and I said, I work with Optoro, we're a returns management company. And he's like, oh, returns suck. And I said, well, ironically, we have a slogan that returns don't have to suck because they are a pain. They're frustrating. And as we kind of dig into more of this WMS RMS conversation, it's ironic timing because just today I listened to the Ecom Logistics podcast. If you haven't listened to that before, it's an amazing podcast hosted by our friends at Fulfillment IQ. And our CEO, Amina Ali, was on an episode called Tech Driven Returns. Fascinating conversation. But Nanad, the host, said something that I thought was really interesting from someone on the kind of the outside world of returns. He said, WMSs are evolving, but they don't cut it for the level of dispositioning that you need to get that value recovery. And then his follow-up was really, you need a specialized system or a purpose-built system. So I think that's kind of where we're seeing the market go and where retailers are really leaning in. So just for anyone listening who's not super familiar with an RMS and kind of how we frame it, and Chris and Ricardo touched on this a little bit, but what is a returns management system? It's applying that systems thinking to the returns lifecycle. So not only the return initiation by the shopper on your website or walking into a store, but the method of recovering that return, whether that's a drop off or a doorstep pickup or walking into a store. And then the third touch point is what we're going to dig into a lot here today is that returns processing. So I get that item back. What do I do with the item? What's the condition of it? And then how do I send that to the highest margin channel in its next best home? So Ricardo, as we talk about kind of like RMS in general, what are some of the benefits of having an RMS? I know we've talked about some of the unique functionality there, and Chris is going to dig into that as well. But What are some of the benefits that you've seen retailers and 3PLs receive from an RMS?
Yeah, I think, one of the most important things you started touching on it. I think, 15, 20 years ago, we used to process returns like once a month. Maybe they were sitting in a corner and once a month, and it was a binary decision. Yes, either a one or a zero. It's good or it's bad, and that was it, right?
Yep.
As supply chain and e-commerce and recommerce continue to evolve, like you and Chris said, now you have a tree of options on where all these returns are going to go. Stores, brands, big brand companies now have outlets, and they're getting smarter and smarter. Some of those outlets and the disposition of those items, it depends on if you're in the south of the country or in the north of the country, because the weather changes significantly. So, you're not going to send bathing suits to New York in January, but you may send them to Texas or California. So, again, it's how do you use a system that's enabling you to make better decisions to increase your recovery and keep the cost as low as possible, right? And by cost, I mean the processing cost. How much does it take for an operator to process and disposition that unit accordingly? If it's 20 minutes, your price point needs to be super high. But if you make it to a point where, it takes a minute or so, you may be able to process items that have a lower price point. And again, increase your recovery and increase your capacity in the locations.
Chris, anything you would add from your perspective?
I think the other thing is just the true visibility. So there's everything around processing and speed and banishing the backlog and everything of that. But in addition, just the true unit level visibility to get your returns. Like you guys mentioned, they're often have been forgotten about in the past, but nowadays folks are using these returns as inbound streams to their return to stock product. And so being able to understand what's coming in, what condition of product you have, and then having optionality of how you're going to sell it is super important. And understanding that full picture of your returns can be a true unlock to the entire supply chain business.
Absolutely. Inventory management is such a challenge, and it's always been a challenge. And you have too much, too little, wrong place, right place. So being able to leverage the inventory coming back and being able to resell it is a huge value unlock for sure.
I think just one more thing, Natalie, adding to what Chris was saying, I think the next phase, or I'm hoping the next phase of how brands and retailers use Optoro's RMS is in a way where they can sort of predict a little bit defects in the manufacturing process. I think that's lacking today. It could be clothing, a zipper that came from certain lot is defective. And if I start getting 10, 20, 30 returns of the same thing and people are complaining the same thing, how can I use that information, take it back to the manufacturing up in the supply chain, and maybe make adjustments to the future processes? Just like companies got smarter with packaging, and now they do a great job packaging their items so they can make it through the supply chain and then come back maybe 2 or 3 times. It's the same thing on the raw materials that they're using. So I think I'm hoping that would be something that your clients and your customers start looking into it, because I think based on my experience with the Optoro system, that could be a huge thing.
Absolutely. Obviously Amazon sets the bar for all of us in supply chain, right? And if y'all have noticed on Amazon recently, they have like a bar on certain items. If an item is returned frequently, they'll say, this item is returned frequently. And many times I've been browsing something and I've made a different purchasing decision because of that bar. And so it not only impacts the shoppers, but, it impacts like the merchandisers or the people kind of building out the product. I have a friend in the consulting space who worked at a big shoe company, and she was over merchandising and never once got access to returns data ever. And she would call stores and she would call different, people in the organization saying like, hey, what do I need to know about this? And so I think you're right. There's still a lot that retailers are realizing they can uncover when they have the data and the insights to track returns. But in order to do that, you have to have a system that's thinking about returns that granular as well.
Yeah.
So Chris, when we're talking about RMS and specifically that back end returns processing, this is your product. What are kind of the main categories of functionality where an RMS is coming to play? And I would usually say in a warehouse, but often knowing that this return process can take place in a store as well. Walk me through kind of those stages and what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the overarching theme, the name of the game of returns is flexibility. And so the first piece here is returns acceptance, or what we call receiving that return. And so like you mentioned, this could be in a store, this could be in a fulfillment center where you're doing returns, or it could be in a dedicated return center. But this first piece is, workflow driven, user-friendly way to receive that return and allocate it to the RMA that it came from. So, tracking number, product, condition, and then tying that back to what the shopper said they were returning, right? So, is it an unexpected item? Is it an exception? Is it in a really poor quality when they said it was a size issue? Like all those types of things are happening at the first touch of the product entering into returns processing. So, flexibility in terms of receiving product from stores, from mailbacks, from consolidation centers. All of these are ways that product gets into the first touch point of returns processing. The big piece is dispositioning that you hit on earlier. And so being able to harvest the data associated to the return reason, the condition of that return, the attributes associated to that product, and making the best decision of where that product can go. It takes the operator out of it, right? So the operator can be super high usability. They can be crushing units per hour, look super good for their supervisors, while not having to take that mental bandwidth to decide where I should put this item. The system does that for you. And when that's happening, you're able to unlock, tens of 20s of different workflows or outcomes, and you can test recommerce partners, recycle partners, you can test back to stock, different things like that, without having to constantly retrain your associates. The system will drive it for you. And then getting into some of the really kind of nitty gritty returns features within the system, exceptions are a low percentage of volume, but a high percentage of headache for anyone that's processing returns. It might be 5%, it might be 10% of your overall volume, but it's probably taken up 80% of your allocated pain point that you're going to associate. And so having a purpose-built reconciliation tool to automate those exceptions, kind of identify, did someone just mismatch returns and, send back 2 returns for the same order with different products? Is it fraud? Is it an empty box? Is it, a box of rocks, things like that? And being able to have a purpose-built tool to do that has been a huge win for our customers. And then return to vendor is a whole world. We could have a whole session on return to vendor probably someday, but orchestrating those relationships with the vendors, how those RAs are accounted for, where they're going to be going. Like Ricardo said, different product goes to different places in different areas of the United States. And so having all that be housed in a module to facilitate getting product back to your vendors is a super important part of the returns lifecycle. For multi-brand and, those big retailers of the world, you can get a really decent recovery by sending back to your vendor. And there's a great partnership play with them as well. So a big piece of it, in addition to test and grade value-added services, Ricardo mentioned this earlier, but getting things back to a sellable state is super important. You know, you're not just going to grade everything as bad and think you're going to have a really good return strategy when you can invest some time and money and use a system to tell you exactly what you need to do to upgrade something and get it back to that sellable state. And then finally, you know, the integrated recommerce piece, you know, where Optoro works with the Rebel Storks of the world, being able not only to just disposition into that end channel, but also be able to facilitate the integration there, the shipping, the packing, everything associated to getting that product back to its next best home, kind of exiting the return system. So hopefully that's a good little overview of the different modules within returns processing in the RMS world.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And you hit on a couple of things that made me think about, you know, when we are talking to warehouse operators, I mean, labor is always a top concern. It's hard to find them. It's hard to retain them. And most warehouse operations are putting 2 to 3x the labor on returns because it's just naturally a more high touch process. It requires more. And not only that, oftentimes it's some of their best people in the warehouse. So it's just more expensive. We actually were talking with one 3PL and just getting a little sneak peek into their returns process. And when their kind of lead returns associate went on vacation, they just didn't process returns because it was all tribal knowledge. And, you know, they were so proud. And he's like, well, I do this. And then I put this code over here. And then I write this down here. And it was just like everyone else is a little cross-eyed trying to learn this very like custom workflow. So automating that, making it simpler and, you know, less prone to error. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I think is worth calling out, and just a little shout out for Rebel Store, is those pre-built connectors to the next channel. So many retailers right now are looking into recommerce. You know, there's all these really great initiatives that, you know, like On Running is doing, trying to think of some other, Nike is doing with, you know, the tech, but figuring out, okay, maybe there's a slight scuff on this shoe, but it's still a perfectly good sellable shoe. So let's put it on our recommerce channel and get 80% of the sale versus, you know, 100%. And then the shopper that may not be able to afford the 100% can get the shoe at that 80% rate. So I think those pre-built connectors, and that's what we have, you know, Ricardo, as you know, with Rebel Store, have been able to pass these baby goods down to you guys so that y'all can help sell them in the market. So I love, as you can tell, I love talking returns and geeking out about this with you guys. But let's spend a couple minutes just kind of talking about success stories, because it's easy to talk about functionality and use cases, and it can make sense on paper, but where does the rubber hit the road here when it comes to what are the actual results that retailers and 3PLs are getting with an RMS? I'll just kind of open it up and you guys can jump in.
Yeah. So I think just to follow along that flexibility thread is being able to test and learn, especially in a space where returns, people are now focusing on them. And so when you can maybe start by sending 75% of your product to RTV, you are then able to custom configure and adjust that. So, hey, maybe we want to try sending 10% to a Rebel store, or we want to increase our number going back to stocks. You can toggle and the system can learn and define those outcomes. And so that's where we've seen some huge benefit for our retailers, where, you know, not only are they able to complete that robust TV process, facilitating, you know, millions of products back to their vendors, but also be able to gradually increase their recovery and test things out because they have a system to do so.
I love that. Ricardo, what about you? What are some of the success stories you've seen?
Well, I think the recommerce one, obviously, in my situation now. Recommerce is important. You said it, right? It's giving the opportunity for other people to use the brand, not only to use it, but to advertise it, right? Every time you wear something or you use something, people are are seeing it, and how many times, you know, I've seen people in the metro or at the airport taking pictures of somebody's shoes or somebody's, you know, stroller or car seat. And then, you know, with the technology right now, you can search for any product. But I think what's big for us at Rebel Store and our partnership with Optoro is, you know, giving giving the ability to the retailer to be able to do multiple source based on category, based on brand, based on price points, and how that benefits companies like us, where we can take those different sorts and get the best out of them. You, in a way, Optoro and the retailers using your software is enabling us to be labor efficient, right? Because when we get those different gaylords and pallets and are sorted in different categories, we can allocate our labor better, and we can see, you know, depending on the products that we need to put on sale, where do we focus? So I think, you know, that's obviously something top of mind right now for us at Rebel Store is how can we recommerce and enable that second life cycle or sometimes third life cycle. I already mentioned a little bit of the manufacturing and how the supply chain upstream can improve. And I think the other one that Chris was mentioning a little bit is the flexibility, right? You have to make decisions again because returns are coming back in different ways to the warehouse. You need to be flexible. It's like you're in a sports game. You have to change the play depending on if it's first quarter or fourth quarter, and if you're winning or losing. So that flexibility and that ability to change the rules and to make your process more efficient is huge nowadays.
You're thinking about sports because you went to the UT game this weekend, huh?
Yeah.
As a Bama fan, I can't endorse that, but
well, aren't they playing in October?
The third weekend in October every year.
I'll give you a call that Monday after that game.
We'll see. We in my tenure, we've done pretty well against Tennessee, but there was a heartbreak a couple years ago, and it was hard.
I know, and trust me, everybody at UT talks about it.
Oh, I bet.
And then just one other piece touching on the visibility thread that we were pulling on earlier, and Ricardo was sharing in terms of being able to forecast. We're seeing a brand who is able to reduce their buying of product because they're infusing their product lines with returns that are in great quality, right? People are buying tons of product online these days. They might buy 3 of the same dress and try one on, find the one that fits them the best, and then return the other 2. So it's really good product. And you can actually save a ton of money by reducing your buys and taking in returns as an inventory stream, where instead of just working with your manufacturer to forecast and get product inbound, you can actually infuse that with returns and kind of save money to your overall top line.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because when you think about the returns life cycle, if you can shorten it and get that product back faster, then it's available to sell sooner, right? So then you don't have to pad your inventory numbers as much to avoid those like stock outs or, you know, overselling, if you will.
Exactly.
So, great point. Good call out. Okay, so if you have watched any number of episodes of Returnology, you know that we always end on a wild question or a random question. But given that you both have been dedicated to returns for quite some time, I figured I would ask you guys, what is the craziest return story you've had? It could be a personal story, or it could be something that you've experienced in a facility or with a customer. Don't mention the customer if it's crazy, but so Chris, You go first. What's your craziest story?
Yeah, so I remember doing an implementation and hearing some feedback about their previous manual returns operation. And this kind of speaks to tying it back to having a purpose-built system can avoid things like this. But the story was the associate had graded a tote bag as salvage. It was no good. It needed to be thrown away, disposed. The manager wanted to, have the best return to stock rate possible. They saw this bag on the conveyor and said, they were yelling, "Hey, what's the deal with this? This should be new. This should be going back to stock. You're hurting our numbers, yada, yada," right? There was no system to lean on. It was very gray area decided by people. So the manager took the bag, put it in their office, and went to lunch. When they came back from lunch, office smelled horribly. Turned out that there was actually a diaper in the bag that had been returned and used, which is why the associate had graded it as salvage. So that manager kind of learned the hard way to, trust the boots on the ground folks that are doing the grading. But, stinky situation with that one. Luckily, it didn't happen anymore once they got onto Optoro.
It's as a mom of 3, I can say you never want to find like a wayward diaper somewhere, no. Especially a dirty one.
Gross.
So gross. Ricardo, what about you? What's your wildest story?
Oh, I have
maybe a little less stinky.
But this is a clean one and a rated for all family members. I think similar to Chris, somebody returned. Oops, sorry. You're gonna have to.
Instead of a mic drop, it was a light drop.
Yes, because I didn't move on the sensor. Anyway, sorry. So funny, just a little bit similar to what Chris was saying. Somebody returned a purse. But inside the purse, they left their passport, their keys. I think a debit card was inside. So, obviously somebody used it, and then they forgot to return everything. I think the ones that we tend to see more common is people switch labels, right? And they end up getting the wrong product to the wrong place. But yeah, I mean, think about it. It's supply chain. Anything can happen. Literally anything can happen.
Anything. I think one of my funniest stories is, I don't know if y'all read this in the news recently, but an innocuous couple was packing a return, and there's paper and cardboard and whatever, and shipped it off. Didn't think anything of it, and they actually shipped their cat. The cat had crawled in the box at some point. They didn't realize it, and they shipped it back. And so imagine being the warehouse operator, opening a box, and there's a cat in there.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
Nuts. So you're right. It's supply chain. Anything can happen, right? Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This was such a fun conversation. I love just kind of picking y'all's brain and getting, insights into your world and what you guys are seeing and hearing. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to join the conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us. Ricardo, it was great to see you. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Natalie, thank you. Very nice seeing you guys again. I'm sure we'll be in touch. Chris, have a good one. And remember, Optoro and Rebel Store.
That's right. Well, thank you guys so much. There you go. There you have it, folks. The great WMS versus RMS debate with Chris Wykoff and Ricardo Menendez. Guys, thank you so much for joining today. I'm your host, Natalie Walkley, and we hope you'll join us next time at Returnology, where we provide you the cheat sheet to help you ace returns. See you next time.